Well, thanks everybody again. I'm conscious that we've concentrated, we've compressed an awful lot of stuff in a short period. Normally this course takes 26 weeks, an hour and a half at a time, including some discussion. And then Linda and I compressed it into 7 1.5 hour, I think it was 1.5 hour videos. Oh, 40 minutes. Oh, okay. 40-minute videos. You can find them on YouTube. The 7 stories, stories with Tony and Linda. If you look that up, that's what we've just been through here together. But we have compressed a lot into a short space, and you've been wonderful to continue the journey and to pay attention to this material, because it is a drama. It's like seeing Hamlet or King Lear or something. Of course, that's 3 or 4 hours, whatever the stage production. But there's an awful lot compressed into the drama, and of course, it's wonderfully written. It takes you through step by step. But this is a kind of drama as well that takes you through step by step. And we've got to the point where modernity, shall we say, kind of begins to happen. Because you could say that certainly Abraham and Moses, and then the Babylonian exile, this is all the ancient world. This is the world of archaeology that can be dug up and, represented by statues and epigraphy, that kind of thing. But when you get to the Greeks, which is where we're arriving, then things really begin to hot up. Beware of the Greeks. I know, yeah, right. I hope there's no Greek ancestry here, but anyway. The Greeks and the Jews, the Greeks and the Israelites, they have created our world. But the Greeks then do come on the scene, and they make a big difference. And the way the Bible sees it is really encapsulated in 2 books. The books of the Maccabees were 2 books of the Maccabees, and then another book, the book of Daniel. The Maccabees is seen as apocryphal or deuterocanonical, but it is really important in terms of your knowledge to get a sense of what's happening. I mean, it's not so much revelatory, although there are elements in it which definitely contribute to revelation, I think. But it's background knowledge, and I think as the Anglican Church says, these books are worthwhile for building knowledge or wisdom or something, or they encourage the reading of these books. And of course, in the Catholic tradition, they are a second canon, so therefore they belong within the revelatory corpus. And I would see them as belonging with that. You really can't get a proper grasp of what we're calling revelation without having some knowledge of these books. So therefore they are canonical in that way. So when the Greeks come, they bring a civilization with them which is as eruptive and transformative as what we're talking about with Israel and the Jewish tradition, but actually more so in direct physical terms. And who knew or really cared about Judea at that time? But the Greeks, Alexander the Great, Macedonia, everybody cared. Because as we know, Alexander was this military genius that every military leader since him, including Cyrus himself, sorry, not Cyrus, that's before. Actually, he looked to Cyrus, sorry about that. Julius Caesar and Napoleon, they looked to Alexander the Great as the benchmark of heroic national conquest or international conquest. And he conquered the known world in 12 years, going from Macedonia all the way to the Indus Valley, all the way to Afghanistan. Kandahar is named after Alexander. You can hear Alexander in Kandahar. He got that far, and the only reason he didn't keep going to China was because his soldiers and his generals were so exhausted, and they missed their wives and homes and children and everything, and purportedly they poisoned him, which of course is the appropriate fate for anybody who conquers half of the world, you know. So he had this enormous, and there's about a dozen, 15 cities named after him. Alexandria in Egypt is named after him. He's left this huge mark, and the theater, the Greek theater, the hippodrome, the place where the horses would exercise, the gymnasium, the chariot circle, the campus, which is probably an extension of the hippodrome. All these things are physical, and the agora, which is the physical heart of a city built of public buildings and temples. The idea of a space in the city which is not just the palace of the king, but it's this space where you can experience what the city means and just walk around and be a new Greek kind of human, which is really what they brought to the scene. That had never been seen before. All that had never been seen before. So it was like Disney and American consumerism all rolled into one in the ancient world. And so it brought the modern world. It brought another world. The modern means today's world, the world of today, and Mundus Hodiernos, I think that's where it comes from, and something like that. And they brought a world of today which is not the same as the world before. And so when the Greeks come on the scene, they inevitably and ultimately have a huge impact on the Jews. The Jewish nation, Judea, cannot remain indifferent to them. And in many ways, Jesus and the gospel is actually a response to that modernity. So that we're not just continuing the old, because the old world really was Egypt, that empire that had gone on for 2.5 millennia, and then Babylonia, which is more or less the same. So these two big poles, these geopolitical poles that had always been there, and they control the world. And then suddenly this thing happens. Persia is a little bit of an interruption, and it signals the interruption of a new of the Greeks, but it's still within the ancient world. And you can see how, with Cyrus giving permission to the people to return and worship their own gods, there's something about kind of a sensibility that respects the ancient world and its cultural system. The Greeks did not respect that ancient world. Why? It's because what they brought on the scene was a kind of rationalism, a material culture which had never been seen before, I just described, but their mode of thinking, their intellectual approach to reality, it's analytic, dialectical working out in Plato and Aristotle and other of the Greek philosophers. This had not been seen before, so they kind of lifted everything up to another level. And of course, if you think about that, that is hugely seductive. Oh my God, who are these people? Where did they come from? And we get the record of that in Maccabees. And it says in 1 Maccabees I won't find it now immediately. Let us go over to the way of the Greeks. Because ever since we have done things our way, we have experienced nothing but disaster. The Jewish experience, as being told in the book of Maccabees, is that we've had one disaster after another. We just had a miserable existence. The Greeks look cool and happy. They swagger around in their agora, in their gymnasia, and why not? Why get rid of this old thing? And let's go over to the Greeks. So see if I can with some research with my glasses on, I can see that. So they. Okay, so this is chapter 1, and it says, in those days, this is chapter 1 of 1 Maccabees. In those days, certain renegades came out from Israel and misled many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the Gentiles around us. You know, that's really giving up on the project right there. For since we separated from them, so we're not Gentiles, we're Jews, many disasters have come upon us. The proposal pleased them, and some of the people eagerly went to the king, who authorized them to observe the ordinances of the Gentiles. So they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem. Oh my goodness. They got the internet, you know. They did what everybody else was doing. And according to Gentile custom, and removed the marks of circumcision and abandoned the Holy Covenant. And that always causes a certain amount of admiratio. How actually do you do that? Remove the mark of circumcision, but we won't go further along that question. They joined with the Gentiles and sold themselves to do evil. So this is the context. This is the cultural context of a cultural eruption that started at the end of the 4th century, because there's, I think, Alexander died in 323. I think that's the date. So it's the end of the 4th century. And it really takes about 100 years for this thing to percolate through to the Jews. And it does through this guy called Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth, a king who's a descendant of Seleucus, one of Alexander's 10 generals. And he separated his empire into, he divided it up among his generals, and 3 of them became very important. One was the Seleucids, the descendants of Seleucus. The other was the Ptolemies, who were in charge in Egypt, and the other were the Macedonians, whom the Romans eventually took over. So they become the remnant, basically, in the Eastern Mediterranean, of Alexander's tidal wave, his tsunami of cultural transformation. And Antiochus has really an imperial ideology. It's disputed among the historians how much comes from those renegades I just read about. In other words, let us go over to the Gentiles. In other words, there's a collaborationist group in Israel. He said, we're sick of this, all these rules and these priests and stuff. Let's go over to the... And they start wearing the Greek hat. That's the thing. That's actually mentioned in 2nd Maccabees. They wear the hat. And it's so cultural and kind of accessory driven. You know, it's like what you look like and how you feel when you wear this stuff, or you go to the gymnasium, all that kind of wonderful. It's the modern world. It's where we look at each other and we ascribe greatness or otherwise. Either you're cool or uncool. The Greeks were definitely cool, and they still are cool. When I was in my department of religion, Christianity was certainly not cool, but the Greeks, all of them, the Stoics, Epicurus, all those people, definitely cool. You know, you invoke them, that's the coolest thing. So they definitely created a cultural moment and a cultural effect. And so Antiochus Epiphanes has, and his name means the epiphany of a god. Antiochus shouting forth epiphanies, so he's up there saying he's a divine figure, and there are coins that have that name upon them. And he, at one point, institutes a law seeking to overturn the Jewish religion. He actually wants to wipe it out from Jerusalem and the surrounding towns in Judea. He actually wants to abolish it. It's a tremendously arrogant thing, but they had collaborators who wanted it as well. And it's the first true religious war, certainly against the Jews, in history. And so he's a very important figure. And it's at that point, and this is where I'm talking now, so the point, what I'm addressing now, is the book of Daniel is written. Is written absolutely contemporary to this experience, exactly in the same time, the time frame. And you'll see how different the response of Daniel, the writers of Daniel, is to the response of the Maccabees, who are the revolutionary group, the group of rebels who fight back against Antiochus in the year 168, I think, to 165, something like that, and actually beat them, and conclusively beat them. They drove them out, they conquered them in battle, and they established their own dynasty, known as the Hasmoneans. So you have the Seleucids, who are the descendants of the Greeks, and that's Antiochus. And then you have the Maccabees, who Judas Maccabeus is the well-known one, and it's Mattathias, I think, is his father, who starts the rebellion, and they drive back the Greeks, who actually come from Syria, but they're the Greek culture, and they purify the temple. So the temple is purified. Hanukkah, I think, comes from the purification brought by. So this is a feast we celebrate all the time. We're commemorating. It's a modern thing because we commemorate the effect of repelling the Greeks and restoring and purifying the temple. So there's another reason why the temple is so important. You could see the accumulated cultural meaning of the temple, that there was the abomination of an altar, the abomination of desolation of an altar erected over the top of the altar outside the Holy of Holies, dedicated to Zeus. I mean, that's exactly what they did. They dedicated an altar to Zeus, which was an impossible abomination. If this is the last stand, it's the last redoubt of Judaism. If Antiochus comes in there and he builds an altar on top of it to Zeus, then we're done. We're finished. We're over with. So it's natural that you'd think of a rebellion. And they did create a rebellion. But at the same time, the book of Daniel is written, and it does not mention the Maccabees once. Because the response of the authors of the book of Daniel is essentially nonviolent. And that is something else that has been covered up in the tradition, that we don't really know that. That in fact, Daniel has been kind of appropriated by dispensationalism. They reads various future events there, and it incorporates or it projects a sense of cosmic battle, of cosmic violence, because there is a mention of the angels of Israel and the angels of Persia are in conflict, but it's very, very minimal, and it's not described in terms of battle. It's in terms of spiritual opposition and contradiction, but we've turned it into a final enormous battle, and that's what we all salivate for, so that we can really get, really have a wonderful violence. And of course, this is behind what's happening at the moment, as they say. These soldiers are telling us that they're being told that we must go and fight in the Middle East because this is the great battle that's been predicted, So we're playing out a playbook that is more and more violent, that has its roots in foundational violence we've talked about, the sacrificial, but then it has its roots also in a reading of the texts, an interpretation, which is violent. But Daniel actually promotes a spiritual nonviolence. And when we get to Jesus, and this is the genealogy so we're finishing at this point with 7 stories. We've conducted an inquiry that has brought us to the threshold of the experience of what it means to be Jesus. It brought us to the moment where Jesus becomes possible and real in historical terms. Without Daniel, there's no Jesus. Without the Son of Man and the contextual nonviolence of the Son of Man, which we will see, there is no Jesus. And Jesus unites that with a suffering servant to create his trajectory, which is the argument basically of N.T. Wright as a scriptural scholar. So it makes a huge amount of historical and cultural sense to say Jesus didn't drop out of the sky because he's the incarnation of God. So boom, we have this kind of metaphysical event that it's true, if he's the incarnation of God, we should all, obey. No, this is a huge struggle in the meaning of what it means to be human. And the authors of Daniel, who are known as the Maskilim, the wise, or those who are good at interpretation, those who can read the signs of the times, who know what's happening. That's what it means, interpreters, basically. They can understand what's going on. It's an entirely different response to a gathering crisis of violence. A huge... The Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans, this accumulating force of empire. And they actually didn't distinguish much between the Greeks and the Romans because they had a lot of the same culture. So you can see this gathering cultural force of violence. It's not just Egyptian force of arms, which was a fact, and the Neo-Babylonian kingdom, which is a fact. But there's something progressing in the earth, and it's empire. It's military and violent empire. Obviously, it's going to progress. The more technology you have, the more iron you have to make weapons with, and the more rationality you have in terms of making war, which is what the Greeks had. They created the phalanx. It's not just a whole bunch like the Celts, the Irish, my crowd would do. They just, yay, charge, and get slaughtered. But you have a bunch of men all armored up with shields. There's about 300 in rows and columns. It's very hard to break them down. And you have 2 or 3 of them in array, and they just march forward. And they just took the war by force, and the Romans perfected it. That's what a legion is. So when the Gerasene demoniac gives his name, legion, And it's glossed by Mark as, oh, that means many. Why? Because he doesn't want to alert the Roman authorities that this is actually an anti-Roman text. This is an unpatriotic text. But obvious to the hearer, legion means military power to the power of what? X, you know. It's whatever we got now, like the Russians threatened this weapon, the Americans threatened this weapon. It's whatever is the latest weapon. And the legion was the latest weapon. You could not stand against it. As Josephus said, the exercises of the legions were like wars, and the wars of the legions were like exercises. They were just so trained. You could not stand in front of it. And so the demoniac is called legion. Everybody knows, oh my God, that's what that is. It doesn't mean many. They have a word for many. It means polloi is many. They don't have to use the word legion. And it's obvious how sensitive that is, that it's glossed in that way. So Jesus drives out from this figure in the Decapolis, which is the Roman region. All those cities had allegiance, in the Decapolis had allegiance, individual allegiance to Rome. He drives out the military infection and impacted violence of Roman power in that individual. So he now belongs to something else, something different. It's what we're talking about. So here in this is very interesting. Another reason why Maccabees is so important, that in chapter 2 of First Maccabees, it tells us, after Mattathias has gathered his sons and those who are on his side, and they go to the hills, to the mountains, and they announce the rebellion, which becomes progressively more and more successful, and they drive out the Greeks. At the same time, at that time, and so I'm reading here from chapter 2, verse 29, at that time, many who were seeking righteousness, you've got to think what that means. It means proximity to God, sensing that you're with God, and justice, because interhuman justice is part of that. They went down to the wilderness to live there. So there's a bunch of people in Jerusalem who leave Jerusalem and go into the wilderness. They, their sons, their wives, and their livestock, because troubles pressed heavily upon them. They're trying to be faithful to the practice of the covenant in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, there's this ideological war against Judaism taking place in Jerusalem, and they could easily be killed. So they escape, they flee. This sounds like nonviolent. What are you going to do, fight or flee? Well, sometimes, if you have righteousness at stake, that is proximity to God, the choice has been to flee into the wilderness. And it was reported to the king's officers and to the troops in Jerusalem, the city of David, that those who had rejected the king's command had gone down to the hiding places in the wilderness. Many pursued them and overtook them. They encamped opposite them and prepared for battle against them on the Sabbath day. This is a new thing. It's a report of an event on the Sabbath day of battle. They said to them, that is the king's troops, enough of this, come out and do what the king commands and you will live. But they said, we will not come out, nor will we do what the king commands, and so profane the Sabbath day. So, yes, they don't want to fight on the Sabbath day, but it's very telling that the event takes place on the Sabbath day. And so what is demonstrated is something about the Sabbath. It's not just Sabbath law. You won't work on Sabbath, and therefore perhaps you won't fight. It's the character of the Sabbath that's at stake. It's the holiness and the blessing of the Sabbath that's at stake. These people are holding on to that. Then the enemy quickly attacked them, but they did not answer them or hurl a stone at them or block up their hiding places. For they said, let us all die in our innocence. innocence, which means non-violence. Innocence means not doing harm, in nocens. So let us all die not retaliating. Heaven and earth testify for us that you are killing us unjustly. So that's the key thing. They will not retaliate, but they believe the cosmic order, heaven and earth, witness on their side. You are killing us unjustly. That's never going to go away. You can kill me, and you will, but there's a witness, there's a testimony, and it's in the cosmos. It belongs to the nature of things, that this is unjust. So that's their position. What does that sound like? So they attacked them on the Sabbath, and they died with their wives and children and livestock to the number of 1,000 persons. So it's the 1,000 martyrs, non-violent martyrs of the Maccabees. And the book of Maccabees records it. Why does it record it? Because there was, I think, because there was something about their testimony which was very, very powerful, and it motivated them. If they were prepared to die and give up their lives with their children, then, and this is what they say afterwards, when Mattathias and his friends learned of it, they mourned for them deeply. So there's a sense of solidarity with these people. These people they created the rebellion. You know, they created the deep sense of alternative, which then the Maccabeans kind of exploited. And all said to their neighbors, which is the traditional and classic argument, if we do as our kindred have done and refuse to fight with the Gentiles for our lives and for our ordinances, they will quickly destroy us from the earth. We will be gone. It'll be the end of us. We can't do like they did, no matter how noble and deeply impressive their witness is. If we do like they do, we'll all be dead, and Judaism and the covenant will all be gone. So we have to fight. And they did fight. In the meantime, these other people died. And you could say it was a wasted exercise on their part. Noble, but foolish. And Benjamin Netanyahu said exactly the same thing. If you look up the recent videos of him, he said, when it comes to it, I'm quoting him now, he says, when it comes to it, Jesus Christ has no advantage, those are his words, on Genghis Khan. He says Genghis like Jesus. He has no advantage on Genghis Khan. He sees the might of violence. He says, we have to fight back, and the Western world has to, he says, his enemy, whoever it is, has to fight back. So there's this sense that is invoked from the biblical record, always is. You know, this has happened before, so we have to fight back. But they haven't read Daniel properly. Because what happens in Daniel? So this is where we get into the genealogy of Jesus. This is where we get up to the threshold. So in a town in Bethlehem, the angel came to a virgin by the name of Mary. That wonderful, beautiful story. All that is led up. That doesn't drop out of the sky. It's not just a pretty story for Christmas. This is all being led up to by these intense struggles, and this struggle of the community that gave birth to Daniel, the book of Daniel. So the book of Daniel doesn't mention Maccabees at all. It doesn't mention any violent resistance, even though they threw back the powers of Antiochus Epiphanes in 3.5 years. It was all over and done. It was a very quick and successful rebellion. There's no mention of them, because obviously they went a different way, and the only way that we know of historically is from the first book of Maccabees, which talks about the 1,000 martyrs. So I make the argument and I've seen it once in an article, and I lost the article. I wish I could have footnoted it in Signs of Change, but I lost the article. So I just to say, well, I'll say it, that the 1,000 martyrs are at the source of the community of Daniel, or they're the same community. They're linked together. They have the same ethic. That it's the same movement in that time. So in Daniel, and when you read Daniel, this is how it has to be read, I think. It has to be read as a testimony to another way of responding to the accumulating power of violent empire, which is the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. That's growing. That's growing. You can't stop it. It's growing in the world. We can fight back like the Maccabees did, and they created a dynasty, and they end up with Herod. The dynasty ends up with Herod the Great, who slaughtered the babies of Bethlehem according to the gospel. Anyway, that's where you end up with the way of violence. But the book of Daniel does something different. So I go to chapter 11 now. And chapter 11 gives us a kind of blow-by-blow account of the progress of the kingdoms of the world since the time of Persia. So chapter 11 is a synopsis of history, and there's another synopsis in chapter 8, and another synopsis in I think it's chapter 2 of the four kingdoms. So the Daniel is filled with the figure of the four kingdoms, the four successive kingdoms. Is very conscious of these four successive empires: the Babylonians, the Medes, kind of intermediate group, the Persians, and the Greeks, and they just get worse. So that's what they're looking at. They're looking at the technology, the cultural and physical technology of violence. That's what Daniel is dealing with. It's not some wild speculative imagination of how God is going to intervene again through violence, but it's trying to understand. It's interpretation, masculine. It's the work of interpretation to try to understand how do we respond, or how does God, with his people, respond to the accumulating violence of the world. So it's an intensely contemporary book for us to embrace in this fashion. So it has these synopses of those four successive kingdoms, and then it gets up to the time of basically the Maccabean revolt, and but it doesn't talk about them, and it talks about Antiochus Epiphanes, and it says the following from verse 29 in chapter 11. At the time appointed he shall return and come into the south, but this time it shall not be as it was before. So there's this kind of a kind of portentous way of speaking or writing. For ships of Kittim, that means basically Cyprus, anything from the west, and it means the Romans, shall come against him, and he shall lose heart and withdraw. And these are historical facts. He shall be enraged and take action against the Holy Covenant. So this is the persecution by Antiochus Epiphanes. He shall turn back and pay heed to those who forsake the Holy Covenant. That's the collaborationists. And then forces sent by him shall occupy and profane the temple and fortress. They shall abolish the regular burnt offering and set up the abomination that makes desolate, the abomination of desolation. He shall seduce with intrigue, the seduction of this Greek world, those who violate the covenant. But the people who are loyal to their God shall stand firm and take action. How do they take action? They don't institute a rebellion. The wise among the people shall give understanding to many. And that is a reference to the fourth song of the suffering servant. By his knowledge, my servant will make many righteous, and he will give understanding to many. And that understanding is of another way of being human, despite and in the face of violence. The wise among the people shall give understanding to many. For some days, however, they shall fall by sword and flame and suffer captivity and violence. So the wise, the masculine, that's the way the word is translated, they fall, they're killed. So not only the 1,000 martyrs, but the leaders who try to articulate this other thing, they're killed as well. Some of the wise shall fall, so they may be refined, purified, and cleansed until the time of the end, for there is still an interval until the time appointed. So this suffering and being killed is part now of this modern time, this period, this new period of existence in which we live, which is that of accumulated technical and cultural violence, that people will fall and be killed in that time. And we think of people like Bonhoeffer and Romero and Martin Luther King, people like that. These are people who have followed the path of the wise. And then it goes on to tell more of the story and how he will actually, Antiochus will fall, and it's not entirely accurate. So it's the biblical scholars tell us that in fact this is written before his actual death, which was something like 165. So we've got a very precise date if you follow that logic for this writing. And then chapter 12 comes, and this is the momentous thing out of which Jesus comes. Someone's going to fall. If they lead people in this way, they're going to die. You're going to be killed. You're not going to counter with counter violence. That's not the way. And we'll go back into how that's perhaps more profoundly understood in a moment. But at that time, when all this comes to a conclusion, Michael, the great prince, the protector of your people, shall arise. At that time, at the end of this period of immense stress and suffering, Michael, the great prince, the protector of your people, shall arise. There shall be a time of anguish, such as never occurred since nations first came into existence. But so this is the accumulation. Nations have used violence, but this is an accumulation of violence. But at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. It's very important to note there, not to everlasting punishment, just to shame and contempt. You chose the wrong horse. You backed the wrong way of being human. That's shame. That's quite shameful. Oops, I made a mistake. And repentance can possibly come out of that, because it seems like it's an emotional state that can change. But anyhow, the important thing here is to everlasting, and they shall wake to everlasting life. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Many to righteousness, again, putting together with the leading many to understanding, comes from the suffering servant, the fourth song. So this is where resurrection comes from. It is not this doctrine that, is just handy doctrine that we recite at the end of the creed. Okay, I believe in the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come, blah, blah, blah. This is what I'm going to look, when I die, this is going to happen, so I better be on the right side. No, this is God's response to the accumulating violence, cultural and technical violence of the empires. Resurrection is God's answer to violence. Now, that might blow your mind, and it might seem ridiculous, which is, of course, what it seemed to the Maccabees. But it is scriptural. It is what the Scripture says. That's what it's about. How can we respond or retaliate to violence? Not with answering violence, but with this interpretation. What the wise do, they read the signs of the times and say, this is the prelude to a final crisis of anguish and suffering, but it means the breakthrough of God into the world with an entirely new way of being human. Now that might again sound far-fetched, except in the interim, we have Jesus. We didn't just have this text, which is pretty far-fetched. We had somebody who bet his all on this text. That is what Jesus did. He's not getting this download from the sky. I mean, he does have a relationship with the Father, but like we see in the Garden of Gethsemane, I don't think I can do this. It's not a programming. It's a relationship. But where is he getting his information? He says, the Son of Man comes not to be served, but to serve. He's using this language. And he's getting his information and his pathway from these texts and makes it intensely human and real, textual and semiotic. It's really what meaning you choose to adopt. But we do have, the great thing is, it's that nonviolence is not invented by Gandhi or Tolstoy before him. Yes, all credits to those guys. And then to any unmentioned women in the story, I'm sure there's lots of them. But we have a text that is almost 2.5 centuries old, 2.5 millennia old, that's already lays it out. And it's a matter of revelation, of apocalypsis. It's not simply, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and then I'm sending you my son, listen to him, and if you're good, do what he says, you'll get to heaven, No, this is a struggle, a profound, incredibly intelligent, heartfelt struggle on the part of the writers and the communities they represent that laid down these texts, laid down these understandings, of which we are the inheritors. We are the heirs. So that brings us to chapter 7, which is at the heart of Daniel. And you're all incredibly familiar with this, I know. And Daniel is made up of, if I can remember the numbers, I think it's 6 court stories.
6 chapters on several court stories.
I think it's 6 chapters, and there's court stories of the figure of Daniel, and then it shifts to apocalyptic visions, of which I think there are 4. And so there's this division in the middle, and chapter 7 is the halfway point where the first of the visions occurs. So Daniel goes from being a court hero, so there's this mysterious book of the traditions of this traditional hero of wisdom, Daniel, in the Babylonian court, to him being a seer and a visionary, essentially in the 2nd century. So this is all written after the fact. It has to be to hold together in a number of ways. But then this is his first vision, and it's wonderful. So he says in chapter 7, in the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream. So this has got to be the 6th century according to the writing, but it belongs entirely to the 2nd century. He had a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. So that, you can have those visions and dreams anytime. Then he wrote down the dream. Crazy thing. This guy's having these crazy dreams, and he writes down his dreams as though they're going to be important to other people. Well, in this case, they are. I, Daniel. Ego Daniel. The I figure, there has to be someone. Each of us is an I who brings that to the conversation. I, Tony. I, Susan. That's very important to be the I in this narrative. There's some point where you say, I say this. I don't care what anybody else says. I say this and I will do it. I, Daniel, saw in my vision by night the 4 winds of heaven stirring up the great sea, the primordial sea over which the wind of God moved at the beginning, And so there's an area which is not entirely subordinate to God. And this is placed in history. It's not in primordial, prehistorical times. 4 great beasts came out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I watched, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground, made to stand on 2 feet like a human being, and a human mind was given to it. Another beast appeared, a second one, that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side, had 3 tusks in its mouth among its teeth, and was told, "Arise, devour many bodies." These are intensely violent creatures. After this, as I watched, another appeared like a leopard. The beast had 4 wings of a bird on its back and 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I saw in the visions by night a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful, and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth and was devouring, breaking in pieces, and stamping what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that preceded it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns when another horn appeared, so this is Antiochus, a little one coming up among them to make room for it. 3 of the earlier horns were plucked up by the roots. There were eyes like human eyes in this horn, and a mouth speaking arrogantly. So this is kind of hallucinogenic, wild, imagistic, but deeply impactful presentation of this succession of empires which is threatening humanity. It's coming up from this area that is not creation. It's not this beautiful world. It's not this area of order of life that we know. It's coming up from the depths. All the violence of the empires comes from somewhere else which is not God's creation. But that's in terms of meaning. I'm not talking mythically here. In terms of meaning of the truth, the relational truth of this thing. And so then, how do we respond to the 4 beasts? As I watched, thrones were set in place, and an ancient one took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. He's the oldest, the most ancient of all beings. His throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence. 1,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. I watched them because of the noise of the arrogant words that the horn was speaking. And as I watched, the beast was put to death, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. So this is what's being put to death, is the technology and culture of violence. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. As I watched in the night visions, so this is where you get to the climax of the vision, I saw one like a human being, one like a son of man. Huios anthropou. So you've got beasts before, savage, destructive, violent being, and then you have a human being. Just a human being. What weaponry do I have as a little baby, as a child, even as a man, a woman? My weaponry is very reduced. My poor little fists, how can I defend myself against a lion or a tiger? Can't do it. I'm not equipped to do that. So a human being is somebody without that weaponry. And he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, and all the peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. That is the kingdom. So when Jesus preaches the kingdom of God, he's talking about the dominion of one like a son of man. It's not some otherworldly thing. It's this thing breaking into history. That shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. So my argument is that Jesus placed his bets on these texts, on these visions, on these possibilities, laid down his life for their offered truth, for the gamble of their truth. And somehow Christianity is the result of that gamble. It really happened. Christianity, there's no doubt about it. The gamble paid off in terms of some kind of community that preserved the message of the memory of someone who went that way, of someone who fell by violence, but believed in resurrection. That the time would come when those who sleep in the dust of the earth would rise again. That's our story. I think that's more accurate. So Seven Stories and Signs of Change claims to be a more accurate telling of the story than dispensationalism or otherworldism, getting to heaven, do things according to the book, whatever it is. No, it's a dramatic story in the midst of the accumulation of human violence of another way that depends on suffering without retaliation, in the faith that there is an intervention possible, and in terms of the gospel, actually happened, and actually occurred, by which that person, that the one who takes that risk, will be vindicated, without repeating or without re-entering into the cycle of violence. So when he meets his disciples who think, oh my goodness, we gave up at the side of the Romans, he says, peace. He says, peace to you, peace I give you, So that's it. That's the story of the 7 stories. It ends with the book of Daniel. And it talks about history to its end. That's the name of the final story of the 7 stories. And it says that the victory of nonviolence is the end of history. And it's the end for which we are working as Christians. It's the point of being a Christian. And it's a huge challenge to yourself, to your own existence, and a challenge to the world around you. But the world, of course, needs it desperately. And the very fact that Benjamin Netanyahu should cite Jesus, the very fact he should cite him, means to say that he knows that the wise will lead many in understanding. He understands. He doesn't accept, but he understands there is another way. He just says it's not going to work. But he does know that's in the world, there are other ways in the world. It's a factual matter of history and culture. And it's not a big step to commit your life to it, to say, well, I'll take the risk myself. It's worth it. It's better than smashing the other person just because they're in my way. So that's it.